everybody, welcome back to another Guiding Hands video, and this will be part 2 of the video series covering energy flow, which is chapter 4.2 of the IB Biology curriculum. So continuing on from the last video, let's move on to the next topic, which is energy loss. So starting with some basic knowledge, energy is released from carbon compounds by cellular respiration and is used and converted to heat. Some other basic knowledge is that energy is stored in organic molecules such as sugars and lipids and can be released by cell respiration in order to produce ATP. ATP is then used to fuel metabolic processes and reactions required for growth and homeostasis. A byproduct of these chemical reactions is heat, or in other words, thermal energy, which is released from the organism. Not all energy stored in organic molecules is transferred via heterotrophic feeding, and this is because some of the chemical energy is actually lost by excretion as part of the organism's feces, or it remains unconsumed as the uneaten portions of the food. Something to note also is that living organisms cannot convert heat into other forms of energy. As said before, heat is lost from ecosystems, and the chemical energy produced by an organism can be converted into a number of forms, including kinetic energy, such as during muscular contractions, electrical energy, like during the transmission of nerve impulses, or light energy, like certain animals that are able to produce bioluminescence. All of these reactions are exothermic and release thermal energy as a byproduct. Living organisms cannot turn heat into other forms of usable energy, which means that energy transformations in living organisms is very inefficient. The heat energy is released from organisms and is lost into the ecosystem, lost from the ecosystem, unlike nutrients, which are recycled. As such, these ecosystems require a continuous influx of energy from an external source, such as the sun. Moving on to energy efficiency, it is important to note that energy losses between trophic levels restrict the length of food chains and biomass of higher trophic levels, as said in the last video. And this is because when energy transformations take place in living organisms, the process is never 100% efficient. Most of the energy is lost to the organism through the process of respiration, energy being released as heat, or energy being excreted in feces or remaining unconsumed, as said before. And typically, energy transformations are only around 10% efficient, with about 90% of available energy being lost between trophic levels. The amount of energy transferred depends on how efficiently organisms can capture and use energy, which is usually between 5 to 20%. Since energy is lost between trophic levels, higher trophic levels store less energy as carbon compounds and therefore have less biomass. And what biomass is? Biomass is the total mass of a group of organisms, which consists of the carbon compounds contained within the cells and tissues of that organism. And because carbon compounds store energy, scientists can measure the amount of energy that is added to organisms as biomass. And biomass diminishes along food chains with the loss of carbon dioxide, water, and waste products like urea to the environment. Because energy and biomass is lost between each level of a food chain, the number of potential trophic levels are limited. Higher trophic levels receive less energy and biomass from feeding, and therefore they need to eat larger quantities to obtain sufficient amounts of food and energy. Because higher trophic levels need to eat more, they expend more energy and biomass hunting for food. If the energy required to hunt for food exceeds the amount of energy available from the food eaten, then the trophic level becomes unviable. So as we can see here in this simple food chain in the pond ecosystem, the first source of energy is the sun, and we can see that if the sun were to give out 100 liters of energy to the producer here, the producer would only receive 10%, which is around 10 liters. And next, the fly here is a primary consumer. From 10% of 10 liters, it only receives 1 liter of energy. The secondary consumer receives 100 milliliters, the next receives 10, and the tertiary or the apex predator receives 1 milliliter of energy. So we can see that from the sun being the initial source of energy through the producer and four trophic levels of consumers, if the sun were to give 100 liters of energy, the final animal would only receive 1 milliliter of that energy, since only 10% is transferred to each succeeding trophic level. Finally, we'll move on to pyramids of energy. And a pyramid of energy is basically just a graphical representation of the amount of energy that is available at each trophic level of a food chain. It is expressed in units of energy per area per time, or in other words, kilojoules per meters squared per year. And the pyramids of energy will never appear inverted, as some of the energy stored in one source is always lost upon transfer. And each level should be roughly 1/10 of the size of the last level, and that is because energy transformations are only around 10% efficient. And the bottom level of the pyramids of energy will always represent the producers, with each subsequent level above representing consumers, which are the primary and secondary consumers, etc. And yeah, so we can see here the once again, the bottom part of the pyramid is the sunlight that goes in to the food chain. The next is producers, and then primary consumers, and so on and so forth. And so that concludes part 2 of the energy flow video series. Thank you for watching, and I hope this video helped you or that you learned something.